You're staring at a flight tracker, Singapore to New York, Dubai to Los Angeles, London to Tokyo, Hong Kong to Toronto. Every major long-haul route arcs gracefully across the top of the world, threading the needle through the Arctic Circle, skimming the southern tip of Greenland, brushing the northern coast of Siberia, because the North Pole is just another waypoint on the Great Circle Highway, a geographic checkbox pilots tick off routinely, a routing option so standard that Polar Ops certification is baked into every modern widebody's operating manual. But drag your finger south, trace the Great Circle route from Santiago to Sydney, Johannesburg to Perth, Buenos Aires to Auckland, Sao Paulo to Melbourne, and you hit an invisible wall. The routes don't cross Antarctica, they flee it, hugging the coastlines of South America, Africa, Australia like scared children, leaving the entire bottom of the planet, 14 million square kilometers, 1.5 times the size of the United States, 58 times the size of the United Kingdom, utterly empty of scheduled commercial traffic, and the internet will tell you it's the flat earth proof, the secret Nazi base entrance, the hidden pyramid coordinates, the alien runway, but the reality is somehow more brutal and more fascinating than any conspiracy. The South Pole doesn't forbid flight because it's mysterious, it forbids flight because it's lethal in ways the North Pole never is, and the difference comes down to physics, geography, economics, and a regulatory framework written in blood. Start with the regulation that governs every twin-engine jet you've ever flown on, ETOPS, Extended Range Twin Engine Operational Performance Standards, the rule born from the 1980s when the FAA said if you want to fly 2 engines over water, prove you can survive one quitting, the rule that says if one engine fails, you must reach a suitable diversion airport within a certified time window, 90 minutes for early ratings, 120 minutes for the 767, 180 minutes for the 777, 787, A350, and now 330 minutes for the 777 XNA 351,000 ULR, and here's the kill shot that ends the conversation before it starts. There are 0 diversion airports in Antarctica. 0, not 1. Not a single paved runway capable of accepting a 787 or A350 with 300 souls and full fuel. The nearest alternates are thousands of kilometers away, Ushuaia at 54 south, Punta Arenas at 53 south, Christchurch at 43 south, Perth at 31 south, Cape Town at 34 south, so a single engine failure over the continent isn't an emergency declaration, it's a death sentence written in regulatory ink, and no aviation authority on Earth, not the FAA, not ESA, not CASA, not ANAC, will sign off on that risk for paying passengers. But ETOPS is just the first layer of the onion. The North Pole has diversion airports too, Alert at 82 north, Thula at 76 north, Longyearbyen at 78 north, even drifting Russian ice stations. So why does the Arctic get a pass while the Antarctic doesn't? Because the Arctic is an ocean surrounded by continents, you're never more than a few hundred kilometers from land, from Russia's northern coast, Canada's archipelago, Greenland's fjords, Norway's Svalbard, while Antarctica is a continent surrounded by ocean, a frozen fortress 3,000 meters thick on average, with the nearest land masses separated by the planet's most violent seas, the Drake Passage, the Roaring 40s, the Furious 50s, the Screaming 60s, latitudes where waves routinely exceed 15 meters and winds scream unimpeded around the globe. Then there's the magnetic nightmare that navigation engineers lose sleep over. The South Magnetic Pole currently sits offshore in the Indian Ocean sector at roughly 64 south, 137 east, wandering 50 kilometers a year toward Russia, and near the geographic pole, the magnetic field lines plunge nearly vertical. Your magnetic compass doesn't point north, it points asterisk down asterisk, useless, spinning, a paperweight in a housing, and while modern aircraft use inertial reference systems, GPS, and ring laser gyros that don't care about magnetism, the regulatory framework for polar operations still requires magnetic navigation redundancy and certified procedures for magnetic unreliability zones, and the certification paperwork for scheduled operations below 70 south is a nightmare airlines simply avoid because the business case doesn't exist. Then the weather, and this is where the poles reveal their true divergence. The North Pole sits on shifting sea ice 2 to 3 meters thick, floating on ocean water that never drops below -2 Celsius. Ambient air temperature -40 in winter, brutal but survivable, predictable, while the South Pole sits on 3 kilometers of ice at 2,835 meters elevation, average annual temperature -49 Celsius, winter average -60, record low -89.2 Celsius at Vostok Station, with katabatic winds, gravity-driven drainage flows off the polar plateau, screaming down at 300 kilometers per hour, persistent, relentless, and a phenomenon called diamond dust, ice crystals so fine they hover in seemingly clear air, air, so fine they clog pitot tubes, freeze engine inlet sensors, turn airspeed indicators into roulette wheels, accumulate on wing leading edges in minutes. In 2018, a research Basler BT-67 lost both engines to ice ingestion at the pole, a turboprop not a jet, and they barely glided to a fuel cache 100 kilometers away. Imagine a 787 with 300 souls ingesting diamond dust at 35,000 feet, both Rolls-Royce Trent 1000s, flaming out, glide ratio 20-1. You have maybe 150 kilometers before impact on featureless white, and when something goes wrong, the rescue calculus is zero. The Arctic has Coast Guard cutters, Canadian Rangers, Russian nuclear icebreakers, Norwegian CR helicopters, U.S. Air National Guard C-130S from Alaska, Danish assets from Greenland. The South Pole has the Amundsen Scott Station with 42 people in winter, a ski-equipped LC-130 Hercules that flies only October through February, and the nearest search and rescue capable asset is a Chilean C-130 in Punta Arenas, 4,000 kilometers and 12 hours away in perfect weather that literally never exists. The average rescue window in Antarctic winter is measured in weeks, not hours. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 doesn't ban overflight. Article 1 permits freedom of scientific investigation and overflight for peaceful purposes, but Article 8 requires environmental impact assessments for any activity, and the Madrid Protocol of 1991 designates the entire continent a natural reserve devoted to peace and science, meaning any crash triggers an international environmental catastrophe with unlimited liability that no airline legal department will touch. So has anyone ever flown it? Yes, and the exceptions prove the rule with terrifying clarity. 1967, Pan Am Flight 50, a 747 SP named Clipper New Horizons, circled the globe over both poles in 54 hours 7 minutes, a record stunt with hand-picked crew, favorable weather window, no passengers, not a route. 1977, Qantas began Antarctic sightseeing flights from Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, 11-hour loops, $4,000 a seat in today's money, no landing, just a coastal flyover and back. They flew until 1979 when Air New Zealand Flight 901, a McDonnell Douglas, the 600th, 10 on the same route, slammed into Mount Erebus at full speed in a whiteout caused by a navigation waypoint error compounded by sector whiteout, killing 257 people, the deadliest aviation disaster in New Zealand history, the deadliest on the continent, and the sightseeing industry died with it. The Mahan Commission report changed polar navigation forever. 2021, a Portuguese high-fly 787-9 landed at Wolf's Fang runway, a blue ice strip carved by a private adventure company, white desert, carrying supplies for a luxury camp, the first commercial jet landing on the continent, but it required months of planning, a custom ice runway inspection by Antarctic Logistics Center International, a weather window that held for exactly 6 hours, and a return flight that nearly scrubbed, a one-off charter for billionaires, not a route. Today, the closest scheduled commercial traffic gets, Qantas Flight 27 and 28 Sydney to Santiago skirts the Antarctic coastline at 60 South, LATAM Chile Santiago to Auckland same, South African Airways Johannesburg to Perth used to brush the Kerguelen Islands at 49 South, all great circle routes that would cross the pole if physics and economics allowed, but the detour adds only 90 minutes while eliminating every existential risk, and airlines are in the business of not crashing. The future? The 777 XNA 351,000 ULR push ETOPS to 330 minutes, 5.5 hours on one engine, theoretically reaching the pole from the nearest alternates, but the weather, magnetic, rescue, treaty, and liability barriers remain, and no airline will spend the billions to certify polar operations for a handful of city pairs that barely fill a weekly flight. So the next time you're at 35,000 feet over Greenland, watching the moving map curl toward the top of the world, the little airplane icon crossing 80 north, 85 north, 89 north, remember the North Pole is a highway with rest stops every few hundred kilometers, the South Pole is a graveyard waiting for a mistake, and the only thing keeping you alive isn't technology, it's the humble, unglamorous, brilliant decision to go around. The poles aren't mirrors. One is an ocean you can cross, the other is a continent that swallows you whole, and the smartest route is the one that respects the